I'm a member from the West Tennessee, or the Tennessee Emu Association. We've been sort of putting on these shows for the last 4 or 5 years, and we keep trying to improve on them, and we've done a little bit of improvement on it from the last time it was done. We do have some of the discs with the PowerPoint presentation on them that are going to be for sale later after the thing. Why farm processing? There's a lot of folks that just can't quite get their birds to a processor. Either it's too long, or too far away from their farms, or too expensive. Processing birds is an expensive project, but some people prefer just to do it themselves, capture the meat, put it in their freezer, and then sell the fat, the feathers. If they capture the hide, they'll be able to salt the hide and sell those too, plus all the other byproducts, bones, toenails, all kinds of things that you can sell from an emu. Set your workup area so you can move around freely. If you don't, you're going to end up tripping over your things, and that costs you time, and sometimes costs you, when you're carrying sharp knives and stuff, other problems. Keep all your set the area up so that you don't necessarily be affected by the weather. I do mine processing outside, and so mainly I keep an eye on the weather, make sure it's not going to be raining, because it's really inconvenient trying to work with fat when it's wet. It's real hard to hang on to. Rope for hanging and working with the stuff, a spreader hanger, or a gambrel as they call it. Containers for your meat, containers for the fat, containers for the offal. Defeathering tool, if you need one. Definitely sharp knives, and a lot of times I sharpen in the middle while I'm processing. Something about silver skin has a tendency to dull a good knife. I don't know what it is, but it's almost as bad as plastic. Paper towels, a bag to put around the bung to keep from contaminating anything. Salt for putting on your hide, and we just keep a garden hose close by for washing stuff off. Hacksaw for cutting through bones like your leg bones or your neck bones. 2-gallon resealable bags or vacuum packed bags for actually freezing your meat in your garbage bags for the offal, and string or rubber bands, and that's usually to hold the bag to cover the bung. Okay. The top tool up here I bought from Cabela's. It's just a defeathering tool that goes in an electric drill. It works great on dry feathers. If they're wet, it doesn't work quite as well. I use this air nozzle for inflating the hide off the fat. Take a small slit, you'll see a little bit further on. This is your gambrel that you hook into the hocks of the legs to lift them up. Gail Gardner and them have actually got a nozzle arrangement that they've got. They took some 1/8-inch brake line, attached it to an air nozzle, and they work it down the carcass to help separate the hide from the fat. This is showing, I take a knife, slice through, and then run my hook along the edge of the knife, because for some strange reason, every time I stick the knife through there, and if I pull the knife out, I can't find the hole again when I go to put the hook through. Be careful to get between the tendon and the bone. If you get outside the tendon, it can pull loose because of the weight of the bird. My hanging rack was a swing set, an old-timey swing set that I've added legs to, so I've got about a 10-foot height now. I actually can hang 2 birds at a time with this. I've got a winch on each side, so I just crank the birds up to the height that I want and go. No, I'm fine. Defeathering. This is about a pound and a quarter of feathers on an adult emu. Roughly about 3/4 to a pound can be cleaned and sold. While the bird's bleeding out, which we usually do by cutting the throat, we capture the feathers and put them in a plastic bag at that time. And then later on, once I get through processing the bird, then I wash the feathers. I've changed my process up, and I went to a dipping tank where I heat the water and dip the bird down in that 180-degree water for about 2 minutes. This shows the heater arrangement that I have. And all I do is crank the heater up, get the water as it's warming up. I circulate it every now and then with an agitator, like a paint stirrer, mounting a drill, one of those for stirring up 5-gallon buckets of paint. But all I did was rigged up a bar with 2 heaters from electric hot water heater, run at 220, and it when you're talking about 75 or 80 gallons of water, it takes well over an hour for it to get up to temperature. This is originally what I used, but it's so tall, I had to drop 1 ring all the way down in the ground, and even then, I still have to push the bird down in it with a shovel to get it completely submerged. They do want to float. But the advantage of using the hot water is used to take me about a half an hour to fist the hide off, or sometimes longer, depending on whether there was a bunch of stobs and pin feathers and stuff in there. Since I started doing the hot water trick, it takes about 8 minutes to take the hide off completely. Defeather and take the hide off. Yeah.
Question, you put them in the hot water before you use your defeathering tool?
I don't use a defeathering tool with it. The feathers.
The tool you don't use at all when you use the hot tank.
Right.
It'll go off so much easier.
Correct. The feathers, it takes no time to pick one that's been dipped. I mean, it's just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. They almost wipe off. So it's a lot easier.
The hide's still usable?
It can be. I normally don't save the hide because we don't have any place around it that will process
But
the
the
hide.
hot water processing doesn't ruin the hide?
No.
You don't get it too hot.
If you don't get it, I mean, you're not cooking it. You're blanching it, basically. 2 minutes is the max you want to go on it. Now, on a really cold day, you may have to dip it a second time to make sure, because on a really cold day, that stuff will tighten back up on you. A friend of mine found out also that dipping in real cold weather can be hazardous to you. He went out there after we showed him how to do this process and killed 3 birds real quick, boom, boom, boom. And he dipped the first one, and it was 36 degrees out, and by the time he got finished with that first bird, his hands were so froze that he couldn't get the next 2, and he ended up processing them with his wife the next day. But he was trying to do 3 birds by himself in one day, and I don't recommend anybody trying to do that. That's just too much work for one person.
So how'd you send that bird off to heaven?
He used a 45. It's a little overkill. Most of us use a 22. The defeathering tool works very well if you've got dry feathers, like I say. There are areas where it doesn't work quite so well. In the flat, where the leg joins into the abdominal cavity area there, that loose skin there, it doesn't work very well there. Do not use a flex extension. One of those flex extensions will wrap you up and beat you to death. I found that out the hard way. The tool is great from June on. Earlier than that, when you've got a bunch of feather regrowth from the winter, the breeding season and stuff, it doesn't work on stobs. And all those new feathers, those little black feathers, it's a pain. There you can see how well it does on. Now what we did normally is hand plucked most of the big feathers off, and then the smaller stuff we hit with the defeathering tool. This is the area I was talking about that it doesn't work all that well, particularly down in there. And down here on the neck, you almost have to have somebody holding the bird because it wants to flop around so much. But other than that, it works fairly well. Here, I'm making a slice for my air nozzle to go in and pop it off. You just barely insert the tip of the knife under the skin. You don't go deep with it. You go deep, you get below the fat. Then you blow the fat off the meat instead of blowing the hide off the fat. Well, there is a membrane between the fat and the hide. And preferably, you want to get into that membrane area instead of into below the fat. There's also a thin membrane area between the fat and the meat. So you got to be careful, but that helps you because that helps peel the fat off the meat. You can see once I started inflating how this is starting to bulge out, and that's literally the air separating the hide from the fat. Yeah, this one was one of our earlier birds before we got the defeathering tool, and it was fun to get that hide off because of all the stobs and stuff. The stobs go all the way into the fat. And that definitely slows the dehiding process. Normally, you can I cut around up here and then down the inside of the leg, around the bung, back up, and then I take and cut down the middle for my cuts to remove the hide. To cut just the skin. Do not cut the fat. Makes it that much harder.
Before you start cutting, how much of the hide are you able to inflate away from the carcass? Are you able to get it pretty far down the whole body, legs, and everywhere?
Pretty well. You get it pretty well. I start pulling the hide off as I blow it off. And I just keep working the nozzle.
So even after you have a cut, you're using the blower and you constantly work it.
Yes.
Pulling it off the
Correct.
edges.
If you're going to save that time, it's a lot of extra work to save the hide.
It's a lot of extra work to save the hides.
If you don't need the hide, you get that off a lot quicker.
Yeah.
You know,
When since I don't save the hides, as a rule, what I do is I normally just peel it off. I just get up there at the top and start pulling. And once it's dipped, that hide comes off. Like I say, the longest it takes me now is about 8 minutes to take the hide completely off.
Well, Alan, if you're not going to save the hide, after you dip it, is there any real benefit to stripping the feathers other than you're gonna sell them?
Well, the advantage is that if you don't strip the feathers, you're not going to get that hide off.
Okay.
It goes, the feathers,
It's taking longer than what you're talking about, but I have them with feathers on, yeah.
well, the feathers on, the problem is you leave a lot of fat on that hide then too.
That's it, right there.
And our object of this is to gather, to reclaim as much of your fat as you possibly can. As a rule, we found out that we get more fat from our birds when we process them than when we've had other processors do it. You can see how thin the hide is when you can actually see my hand through the skin while I'm fisting it off. This is the membrane that I was talking about. Unfortunately, what has happened is I've got a piece of fat is stuck, and the membrane is stuck to the skin here. So I've already started to pull the fat off with the hide. So what I have to do is come back here and literally fist that off to get the fat off the hide. As you get down towards the neck, the area that we call it the boom box. I don't know what the correct name for that is, but it's what they puff up when they're grunting and booming. It has a tendency to collect blood in it. So you just have to be careful when you get down there. Getting the down probably about just above that boom box, I usually get the hide, grab it, and pull, and it strips off fairly well, even with feathers on it. There is a little bit of fat, but not enough to worry about that it ends up staying on the hide. And this shows my pulling. Because of the fact that you are, go back to that. Because of the fact that you are hanging the bird for a long period of time, a lot of the blood will drain into this area. And some processors do not like that bloody fat. They won't take it, the oil processors. Some will. Have to talk to them, see which your processor that you're using, if he will take it, fine. But you can wash a lot of that blood out. You can't get 100% of it out, but you can get a bunch of it out.
You remove the head,
Yes.
okay, it still does that? Because I haven't had the problem.
It depends on how we're doing. If we're saving the skeleton because we've got an order for a whole skeleton, like from a university or bone collector or whatever, we don't remove the head. We ship them a whole carcass intact, other than the meat's been stripped off and the fat's been stripped off. But the head will still be on. And usually what I do is I come down to about this area and cut the hide and leave that all intact and just pull the hide off over the head.
Some of them bleed out easier, better than others. This one shows one that didn't bleed out as well.
Right.
But you can soak that fat and get it out. And when you remove it, I think we showed this a little bit.
Yeah. This is basically the way, if you take the time and do it right, you get the hide off looking something like this. And this is, it's been rinsed off, but it hasn't been washed real well or anything. And the neck area will still have a few feathers in it, but that's not a problem. After you've rinsed the hide and everything, you take rock salt or table salt. Table salt works better because it's a lot finer and spreads out a lot easier. And you just coat the whole inside of the hide with the salt, and then you fold the edges and make sure they're salted, and then roll the hide up and put it in your freezer.
You can get a pickle of salt, it's even better. It's just
Probably.
real fine, it's not cheaper too.
Yeah.
You gotta buy it like 25 pounds at a time.
Now we're ready for the fat removal. And basically everything that you see there that's white is fat. And that's money in the bank for you. So the name of the game is to get it all. And I usually start with Myra and I working together. We'll strip the neck fat off so she can be, while I'm getting the rest of the external fat, she'll be working on the neck fat, trying to wash out as much of the blood as she can.
If I can interject here, if you're careful taking this off and you don't burst these big blood vessels, you can clip those out as you're taking
The neck fat off.
that off. If you're careful, you can leave those still on the neck and take it off without getting the blood on the neck.
Right.
But,
You sort of have to fillet the fat off the neck and try and not get the big arteries going down, because they do make a bloodier mess when you're trying to process. You can see how the fat and going around. Now there is a little bit of meat in the neck fat, but it's not very much. And the processor that we use for our oil hasn't complained about the amount that we got there. What you need? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Unfortunately, that's what the neck fat usually looks like after you get it right off the bird. After it's been hung for a while, it really drains a lot of blood down there, and it takes copious amounts of water to rinse that blood out. But working with it and soaking, you can get probably 80%, maybe 90% of the blood out. Depends on how careful you were on avoiding the blood vessels there in the neck. I usually start at the top, up around the tail, and start stripping the fat off in manageable chunks, and put those into my metal pan. The size, reasonably handling the chunks makes it easier for you to bag it up later, whether you're going to be using a Ziploc bag or vacuum seal. Our processor loves it since we've gone to the vacuum packing on our fat. He's had a lot less problems with freezer burn and stuff. If you're going to grind the fat, you may want to go ahead and cut into really smaller strips now to save time later. That's up to you. However you want to deliver it to your processor.
I don't want it ground.
Oh,
You can take it out.
okay.
That's what I missed. I moved it back towards the back.
Yeah. And as you can see, you just slice along the membrane outside the meat, inside the fat, and it pretty much will peel off without too much difficulty. I got a little carried away with the meat on that one. Normally I don't have that much trouble. Oh, okay, I know what it is. This meat in this area here comes from around the wing area. There is a patch of muscle in that area that can be caught in the fat when you're stripping it off.
It's very thin, it's easy to just shake it off.
Yeah, it's fairly easy to get it out. There's your bird with the external fat already removed. And basically, that's about half your fat that you've got. The other half is inside. What I always do is I come up over the top of the bung, and I'll take and cut down to about here, cut down to about there on the other side, and proceed to pull that out far enough that I can get the plastic bag. We always use the Walmart plastic bags wrap it around there, tie it off, put string on it, rubber band, whatever, just to bag that bung so that any pressure on that doesn't spoil by getting fecal matter all over your fat and your meat. As you can see, once I've stripped it out, I left the bag off on this one just for pictures taking. Normally the bag's in the way, but I stripped down with a knife very carefully down. There's I don't know what you call that membrane, but it's fairly thick, and that's what actually holds the intestines and the offal in. But the fat is just inside that membrane. Because of the fact that we do trim that membrane off, when we get up here ready to go to start working the knife back in behind, pulling the vent out, we literally bring everything out at one time. And I usually have my wife standing there with a bowl to catch it. And I just work my way down the bird. You can see how we've started pulling out.
This is a different bird, though.
Yeah, it's a different bird. We, what I do is work in behind to separate it out and then bring this out. Okay, this is all of your internal fat plus your internal organs. And what you have to do is literally, very carefully, strip the fat away from your organs. But if you take a game shears or a good pair of kitchen shears, you can cut the membrane only that separates the fat from the organs, and that won't be a problem. You can see how she's doing that right there. And trust me, there's a bunch of fat on them organs. As you can see, there's quite a pile of fat there. This bird that we processed there was probably a 14, maybe a 16-month-old bird. Yeah. Probably 16. But your external fat, internal fat, and your neck fat. And we always try to keep the neck fat separated just in case the processor doesn't want the bloody fat. All right, the AEA worked with the International Ostrich Meat Conference in South Africa and Belgium in '97 to establish the standardized nomenclature for emu meat based on ostrich cuts. And the 6 major carcass cuts are neck, rib cage, the 2 thighs, and 2 drums.
How long do you save the heart, liver, and gizzard?
Only if I'm going to be using catfish bait.
Oh.
We save the hearts occasionally, but we've been processing so many birds that we don't want that many of them. But a lot of times my role.
Well, you can stuff the heart and foot, you can treat it just like beef heart. There are people who like beef and liver, Alan doesn't like it, so yeah.
Right. I'm a little nervous about non-inspected livers, okay? I would prefer to have my livers inspected by somebody who can identify any possible problems. My eyeballs are pretty good, but I don't want to take any chances. A lot of people eat their livers. I don't have a problem with that. We, a lot of times, like she says, she'll take the hearts and do them like a beef heart or something and stuff it and bake it in the oven, and they work pretty good. but they also make great catfish bait.
Oh, it doesn't have the twang like the beef liver does. It's
No.
a different taste.
Okay.
Do you sell much at all to the barfers, the people that feed?
We have not sold any of our meat to the barf people or the Humane Society that wants fresh raw meat, you know. But this is, some people have that opportunity. In our area, they don't. Now, at one point in time when we were butchering a bunch of birds, we were hauling raw meat over to Wildlife Rescue, that part of the Carroll County Humane Society. And she had a whole bunch of wounded and birds and coyotes and foxes and wolves and bobcats and all kinds of critters that just absolutely loved emu meat. We made sure that they were on the other side of the county from us, though, because I figured once they figured out that was some good eating, I don't want them to come hunting. Underside and outside of the leg. Okay. How many? Is this the first?
This is you taking it off,
Yeah. Okay.
and then the next photos are from Gail.
Right. This, I normally start right up here along this. It's just a thin, clear membrane, and I start separating the flank steak out there. And it peels down, and it just trims out real nice. And it's a nice little steak. Gail Gardner sent us these as to how they trim theirs out, and that's basically, they pull off all of that in basically one big chunk. They got the bell exposed. Knife is pointing under the bell itself. They call that, I thought that was the fan.
This is, that's the famous, right under the knife is right under.
Yeah, okay,
She's got the, bill's just exposed.
right. On the outside of the leg now, you've got a large area of some pretty heavy meat and several. This is actually close to around the hip area, and this would be the first knee, and then down here would be your second knee. An emu that's been fed a balanced ratite diet will produce more meat and fat than one that has been fed on browse or cracked corn. We talked with our processor, and he was expounding on how much yellow fat he was getting. And I'm not talking about light yellow. I'm talking about yellow to the point where it was almost UT orange. And he says, I don't know if that has any effect on the efficacy, I believe is the proper word, but they prefer their fat to be white. So a properly balanced ratite diet is the way to get your white fat. 14-month-old birds that have been farm processed should produce 25 pounds of meat for your freezer, 1 liver for liver and onions or pate, 1 heart boiled or sliced cold for sandwiches, 25 pounds of fat, 3/4 to a pound of sellable feathers, craft market, hide for tanning, 6 claws for jewelry and crafts, and bones, niche market for dog food. Are really good at catfish bait. That's it. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, way back to the beginning, after you pluck your birds, you market your feathers. What kind of drying process do you use to dry your feathers after they've been dipped?
The feathers, after they've been dipped in our hot tank, go into a plastic bag, okay? And that plastic bag is then taken into an area that I have washing machines set up to wash the feathers. I wash them, spin dry, and then I dry the feathers in a clothes dryer that's specifically set up for the feathers.
You can put those feathers in a net bag, do the same thing without,
No,
yes,
no.
we do.
Yeah, well, you aren't doing pounds at a time, are you?
Well, yeah, when it comes off the bird, but still, it works really well.
As a rule, you'll end up with a tangled up ball. And we've been down that road many times, and we have gotten away from that. I have a tumble dryer, front load tumble dryer that I usually do about 1/4 of a pound at a time in. I only have to run in there for about 3 minutes to dry them.
Put a tennis balls in there with them?
Nope. I don't want to damage the feathers. I put dryer sheets in there to reduce the static and tumble dry them for 3 to 5 minutes. It depends on how many feathers I've got in there. Yes, ma'am.
Do you use a regular washer and dryer, or have you modified it?
They are modified. Trust me, you don't want to do an unmodified one. You get feathers plugging your pumps and all the holes and everything else. Yes, sir.
As far as pin feathers are concerned, in your dealings with processors, how many pin feathers are too many pin feathers?
I've never had a complaint, so I really don't know. Because of the fact that when they render the fat, the first thing that happens after it's rendered is it goes through a filter. That's where they catch all of that. That's where they catch the meat, the feathers, the dirt, what have you. So most of your processors, they don't squawk at you about feathers.
We processed 17 birds a couple of weeks ago over here at Great Falls, and they had a brand new USDA inspector there that made them throw everything away they had a pin feather in. So we got 70 pounds of fat.
Somebody needs to go talk to that inspector.
I wish that they would have called us before they did that, but
Let's just do that.
Yeah. Well, you got to understand, there's people out there that we've been fighting this battle since day one. And I really don't know why some people are just dead set against ratites, but there are those people out there, and they make life miserable for us. But that's one of the reasons why I do my own.
You see the number of pin feathers right here.
Yeah.
Now, on that's not really a problem. This is another good reason for farm processing. You've got people throwing away your data if there's a pin feather.
yeah, well, it was never a problem up until this year, and it's a brand new, newly hired, newly minted inspector that either didn't know or just said, well,
I would file a complaint with his district office and let his supervisor handle him. Any other questions?
Do you know, like what, if there's any laws or troubles that I might run into, because I'm going to be doing large quantities on my ranch, and I'm in California or the rural.
Each state is different on their laws and stuff. Tennessee, they haven't squawked at me about farm processing and everything. Now, Jim Barr, when he was trying to set up his processing facility, they had him jumping through hoops trying to get permits, because if one drop of blood reached the ground, they were going to revoke his permits. So he was having to concrete everything where the processing was going to be to make sure that, and he even was going to set up a digester tank to take care of any water and blood and what have you, an aerobic or anaerobic, I'm not too sure, type of digester tank. And they still hassled him beyond belief. And I still think that's all part of the prejudice against ratates, because the ostrich people have the same complaints. But out in California, you take your chances, boy. Anybody else got a question? Yes, sir.
Alan, I think from what I see here, shouldn't we just inform the farmers as to why they're going to get yellow fat? What is the main cause behind it?
Most people understand that they're going to get yellow fat by feeding predominantly corn. That's where most, at least according to Paul Binford, that's what he has found. And but people do that because corn's cheap compared to some of the other ingredients that they put in. Well, the problem is, yeah, it's cracked corn by itself is almost indigestible for an emu. An emu's digestive tract is, you know, it's 6 hours from the time it goes in till it's coming out. And most of them can't digest cracked corn. Boiled cracked corn now is a whole different story. And that's why most of your feed that you get has got boiled cracked corn incorporated into it. And it does work very well. They do digest some of it, but that's also, if they get too high a percentage of corn in it, you're going to end up with yellow fat. Now, there may be some minerals in some of the soils and stuff that may contribute to it too, but I don't know what they were or what they are. Well, if there's nothing else, ladies and gentlemen, that'll conclude my presentation.